morning, Pittsburgh and universe. This is JC on a bike, and my name is JC. And this is the Gigaohm News Morning Report. Gigaohm News is high resistance, low noise news brought to you by a biologist. And the morning report is brought to you by that biologist on a bike. I'm real happy to finally be making this bike ride. It's taken me a while to convince myself to believe in my gut and to believe in my intuition, which has been ringing a bell since January and February. And I am now thoroughly convinced that I and my intuition were right. And so let me just declare it right here and right now. The pandemic, from a biological perspective, is over. Okay? Let me say that again. The biological pandemic that was blamed on SARS-CoV-2, the virus, that pandemic is for all practical purposes over. And what we are now experiencing is a very thorough infection of a psychological pandemic, the symptoms of which range from general angst, confusion, frustration, often misdirected in the form of protest or whatever. And so what we are really seeing here now is something that has been blown spectacularly out of proportion. The mainstream media and social media themes continue to ignore the secondary effects of the lockdown, of the unemployment, of the lack of being in school. None of these effects are considered significant in the face of saving the hypothetical millions that they predicted would die if we didn't take drastic measures. And the thousands that they say are going to die if we don't continue to take drastic measures. And I'm very sad to report that everybody who already knows this truth knows it. And everybody who's trapped inside of the machine, the TV, Facebook machine, you aren't going to get out unless you do it yourself. Because your brain is going to reject all assistance that's provided to it passively. You're floating in your little life buoy in a sea of information that you don't understand, and all you know is that you're not drowning right now. All you know is you're not sick yet. So as long as you just shut up and stay in your little life raft, you think you can float there indefinitely. You cannot underestimate the number of people that are suffering because of unemployment, because of economic shortage, which directly translates to food shortage and daily stress. You cannot underestimate the impact that this has had on all of us. Everyone who's confused, everyone who's afraid they might get sick, everyone who's taken days off that didn't need to because they were told they should, everyone who's lost productivity, every child who's stayed home for 6 months when they should have only been home for 3, all of these negative effects of the pandemic are 100% valid, 100% real, 100% measurable. And we don't talk about it on the news. And the only thing we are talking about on the news is a case-demic. And these numbers are being portrayed in such a dishonest fashion that it's difficult on a bike ride to explain how dishonest it is. Because it is the dishonesty of the test on a low prevalence background combined with the presentation of total drawn test number data without giving you any background information about what that raw data means once massaged and interpreted by a statistician. The very simple way to illustrate it would be to have 100 people or 1,000 people in a group, and one person has the virus, just one, and you're trying to find that one person in 1,000 with a test that's only 99% accurate. And let's just put that person with the virus as the very last person that you test. That means that 9 people are going to test positive before you find the one guy that is positive. That means that if the prevalence is low enough, the active prevalence of the virus is low enough in a population, the false positives will greatly outweigh the actual positives. And so in that population, for example, you would be telling people that the prevalence was 10 times higher than it was, because your prevalence would be based on a false positive rate of only 1%. This is a population or a group of 1,000 people where only one person has the virus. Now just take this and extrapolate that to population numbers, and you see in order to create the same results, you would need to have 1 million people and 10,000 people would have the virus, I believe. And in finding those 10,000 people, you would actually find 90,000 people that were not infected with the virus. Now the point is not to tell you or give you some kind of statistics lecture while I'm on the bike, because that's not possible. And maybe I even got that wrong. But I'm close enough to the ballpark to where you yourself need to sit down with a pad of paper and a couple of these articles, and you need to learn it. As an adult, this is your call to action. All that algebra that you took in high school, now's the time to bring it to bear. This is the one lesson in statistics, biology, and medicine and health that everybody on the planet needs to learn very well, inside and out, right now. The statistics of tests with an accuracy less than 100% on a prevalence, that means how many people in the population actually have the pathogen for which you are trying to test. The lower that prevalence is, the more ineffective and inaccurate test is. And so if asymptomatic people are not testing positive, if asymptomatic people don't pass the threshold of the PCR test in order to test positive, and they stay in the range of the false positives, then nothing that we are seeing is real. Because if they test 7 million people in order to find 10,000 cases today, and you know that 1% of all the tests are false positives, what? Huh? Do you see? These numbers don't even make any sense. And because all of us in general are used to listening to our squares, to the light screen, to the light square, and the heads that are on it, and trusting what they say when they tell us that there are a new record number of cases this day, without telling us that we also tested a record number of people today. We are too ignorant as a population to understand that that number then has no context. And that's the most important lesson that we can learn right now. We can all do our homework. We can all do our homework, because if we do, and we learn exactly what these tests are not telling us, and if we do our homework and we really look at the numbers in Spain and the numbers in Sweden, and we don't close our ears and our minds to these alternate explanations, I think the vast majority of Americans, as bamboozled as they are by their TVs and Facebook, still have a legitimate chance to awaken. Because most of us are awakened to one part or another part of this conspiracy. We might not be awakened to the vaccine part and to the pharmaceutical part of it, but we are definitely awakened to the financial side of it, for example, and how easy it is to steal money through banks, and to use banks to steal money, how easy it is for fees of giant transactions to add up to enormous sums of money just being scraped off the top. But we don't understand the biology. Or maybe we think we understand. Shit, I think my back tire's flat though. That sucks. I wonder if I can stop there and pull it up. Could just be low on air. Shoot. Shoot, shoot, shoot. It's not so bad, I don't think. Only takes one little thingy-ding. It only takes one little thingy-ding. And your head will be an egg on the sidewalk. You'll be dead. This kind of biking is not so healthy, I assure you. I can feel my throat going dry. There are times when I decide, when a truck like this is in front of me, that I'm just going to pull over and wait. The problem with that strategy is you never know how long you're going to be stuck behind them. Oh, fresh air, if there is any in Pittsburgh. So the first biology lesson you have to teach yourself is a little bit of a statistical one. You have to learn how the accuracy of these tests, the false positive rate, the false negative rate, the true negative rate, and the true positive rate, how these numbers translate over a different prevalence in the population, so that you can really start to see why, after the epidemic is over, which is now, the epidemic is over, the number of people that are getting the virus as new is not exponentially increasing anymore. That can't happen forever, you see. And so once you start to process that, and you realize that the lie that they told you was that the number of people that would get infected would continue to exponentially increase until everybody was infected, which is biologically impossible. Okay? It's impossible. So there is a real lie being told regularly on TV now that the number of cases matters, and that's a lie because they're not telling you the number of tests they've done to find that number of cases. So they're telling you a number that means nothing, and they're telling it to you with the confidence of experts to make you think that the case number matters to understanding the epidemic, and it does not. The only thing that matters is ICU admissions and deaths, and all of those are down under the all-cause average now. The pandemic is over, folks. There's no need for a vaccine. There's no need to keep the schools closed. There's no need to blame Donald Trump because he had nothing to do with it. It's freaking biology. And I'm not a big Trump fan. I don't think that he's a genius. I do think that he's being used as a dope. He's not smart enough to know where the levers of power are in Washington, and so they can lead him around by his nose and make him feel like he's the president, just like they could do to you or me. Secret Service act like he's important. Everybody takes his orders. They all show up for the meetings, but he can only be in one place. He's only got a few people who are totally loyal to him. Everybody else is in it for themselves. You know that. Our entire country is a den of thieves, and we thought we could elect Donald Trump and then he could go in there and compete with them. He went into that den of thieves and they made him feel like he was one of them, but he's not. And whenever it's convenient, they blame him. And whenever it's convenient, they don't. That's the easy theater that's going on right now. But the pandemic is over. I'm going to put a sign on my bicycle that says the pandemic is over. It could come to Pittsburgh. It could hit a few old folks' homes or take out a few old people here. It's all a question of whether it's been here already or not. We can't really know that for sure, one way or another. But my final message is that once you understand the tests, then what you have to understand is that the only way that they can continue this is if we keep letting them test us with these horribly inaccurate tests, and then keep letting them wave the false positive rate in our face as if it's real data. Once you understand it, you will understand why, unless you are very sick, there's no reason to test you anymore. Nobody should be tested anymore. And in fact, interestingly enough, you will see that the CDC a few days ago changed their directive on testing and have stopped testing asymptomatic people. That's a pretty big change from we got to test everybody frequently and often. And they're not publishing this on PBS NewsHour. They're not talking about it all, but it's a real directive change. And the real reason why that directive change has happened is because they know that we see it. People are coming out, people like me and the ethical skeptic and other people are coming out and pointing out that this is wrong. They are pointing out the illusion. They are pointing out the falsehoods of it. And so the only way to keep this going now is going to be subtle deception. Subtle deception. That's all they can do now. They cannot do the same level of beat us over the head with it that they were before, and you're going to see that. Things are going to change now, and it's going to be much more about whether or not we can open schools. And so that debate is now going to swing on vaccination. And so we need to be aware of the fact that the narrative that they're trying to tell us about our immune system is real too. The narrative is that you have to have antibodies to something in order to be immune to it, and if you don't have antibodies, chances are you could be infected again. And we need, as a society, to understand that this is a horribly simplified version of immunity that does not take into account at least 2 prior stages of immune response. 2 layers of the immune system that could, in many cases, stop a viral infection before immune memory needs to be generated. And so real short through the corner, the complement system is a series of molecules that can sort of randomly detect foreign invaders and label them for destruction. The complement system is present in your blood and your mucous membranes and everywhere, so that viruses that are just floating around oftentimes just get randomly found and degraded because they're easily labeled as foreign. Nice one. Nice one. So that is followed up by the dendritic cells, the macrophages, the eosinophils, all of these cells which can engulf particles, engulf proteins, and engulf cells that are expressing the wrong proteins, so they can even engulf bacteria, phagocytose them or eat them and dissolve them. And those same cells, many of them, especially dendritic cells, have the specific job of carrying those foreign proteins, processing them and presenting them to the T cell populations in your lymph node. The T cell populations are basically broken up into 2 populations, the CD4 positive and the CD8 positive cells, which you can do your own research about. And the CD4 positive cells differentiate into 2 types of helper cells, and after that is when the B cells are taught the epitopes and stimulated to differentiate into B memory cells that produce antibodies in the short term, but then migrate to other places like bone marrow and hang out until they're needed again, and then only produce antibodies upon secondary infection. And we know all this, but it's like the pandemic, we've had to teach ourselves immunity again, and in the 6 months that it took all of us to learn this again, that they stole trillions of dollars from us and have bamboozled the most vulnerable and most confused of our population into believing that the only way out of this is a vaccine. And the way that you know that this is fake is like tenfold, but one of the best sort of common sense, find in your gut sort of evidences is that they've never told you what vitamins and minerals are most important for you to get. They've never told you what possible cheap over-the-counter antiviral things might be worth trying. And they fought against every one of these versions which was known to work, including hydrochloroquine, including phantomide, including quercetin. All of these things that are cheap generic, over-the-counter. They've all been dismissed, if not attacked and lambasted as dangerous. Hydrochloroquine has had at least 2 studies that have been retracted that have tried to portray it as a dangerous drug to the heart. It's a drug that's been around for 60 years to treat lupus, malaria, yada, yada, yada. And they used it at such a high concentration in such sick people that it created an uproar that caused a Lancet paper to be retracted. And yet our nightly news is still not talking about hydrochloroquine. There's a paper from Belgium which shows that early treatment with hydrochloroquine is incredibly successful. Pandemic's over. Pandemic's over, boys! Hey, Frank. I really believe it with all my heart, guys. The pandemic's over. It's all over, but in our minds.